Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Re-Federalist Report. I am Brady, also known in some odd corners of the internet as Warhamster. Joining me, as usual, is my good friend, constitutional mentor, Mr. Constitution himself, Douglas V. Gibbs.
I'm not even going to ask about the odd corners, but I'm glad to be in this corner. This is a good place to be, so thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're getting really good viewership on these series on Madison's Notes, which is great. I appreciate the support, everyone. And we can tell, looking at the history, people are going back and watching the old episodes. And speaking of which, this is going to be episode number 29 of our journey through James Madison's notes from the Philadelphia Convention. Doug, why are we doing this?
We're doing this so we can fully understand the Constitution. If you're going to understand the original intent of that contract, that compact between the states, you got to be inside the room when they were debating it, when they were talking about it. We have this, for some reason, Americans have this vision of the founding fathers all being hand in hand and dancing through the daisies with each other in full agreement. And to fully understand why we have the system we have to listen to both sides of the argument. And I think in this day and age, that's even more important because, and I've written about this and talked about this a little bit, we now have a rise of a new thinking in America, DSA, socialists, whatever you want to call them, and they're calling for a lot of the things that the Constitution was designed to get rid of. We've already gone down certain paths. It was a failure. The Constitution was written the way it was for a reason. And that's the purpose of these episodes.
Yeah, and that's a really good segue into from last week's episode into this one. The DSA is out there saying they're going to abolish the Senate. Well, the founders in Philadelphia, right at this moment in time, are debating whether to have two different branches, a bicameral legislature, how to appoint the Senate. The whole thing they're trying to do is separate protect the big states from the small and the small states from the big and have a balanced government. So we actually have to compromise. That's what they're trying to do. If you want to abolish the Senate, it means you want 0 states' rights and you want to say, okay, we're going to be the majority and we're going to be tyrants. And that's absolutely what they want to avoid. And that's really what.
In other words, they're trying to avoid single faction rule.
Yeah, very much so. So let's jump in. When we last left off, we were on June 30th. We're going to pick back up here on Monday, July 2nd. They've taken Sunday off. And, of course, they'll be taking 2 days off on July 3rd and 4th for the obvious reasons. First thing they do when they get there Monday mornings, they take a vote on a motion that was pushed by Mr. Ellsworth. And I counted the votes up. It looks like this one did not pass. And this was on a question for allowing each state one vote in the second branch, which would be the Senate. That has not been passed yet. Again, not everybody is there. And so these are mixed votes.
And note that the discussion is that in that second chamber of this new Congress, that the states should be equal in voice, as opposed to it being determined by population in the first chamber. So they have agreed that that's a decent idea, but right now the one vote per state is not necessarily being passed. Now, we have to ask ourselves, is it because some states want it to be based on population, or is it because some states want it to be something other than one vote? And the at this point, it's the first. There's still a debate over population versus equal representation. Ultimately, as you know, if you know your civics, our Senate has 2 per state. That's what they came to the conclusion of. And the reason why is it's 1 per chamber of the state legislature. State legislatures also as a pair. So, but anyway, I just wanted to bring that up so you recognize they shot down 1 vote per. That doesn't necessarily mean they're not discussing that it should be equal, but there's still a lot of them leaning towards population, especially when it comes to the larger states.
Yeah, and fun trivia question. There's one state in the union that does not have a bicameral legislature, that being Nebraska, which is an oddity.
1930s, they changed it for whatever reason.
The DSA would love them. The other thing that's developing here is you see a rift or a divide between agricultural, agrarian states,
Mhm.
and the northeastern seaboard, which are more mercantilist. And
Mhm.
that obviously that divide is going. They have different interests, different needs, different type of government intervention that they want in terms of protected tariffs, and that would play out and result in the quote unquote civil war. But that's starting. You can see the seeds of that being planted already. Everyone understood the states are not the same. So, jumping in here, we've got Mr. Pinckney from South Carolina. Once again, there are two Charles Pinckneys here. This is Pinckney the younger. The one who's going to speak next will be General Pinckney, which I believe is his uncle. Is that right? Memory serves?
I believe so, but go ahead.
Both from South
Yeah, no,
Carolina.
but the young Mr. Pinckney, and he's one of the younger ones there. He's not the youngest. I think the youngest, if I remember properly, is from Delaware, or New Jersey, one or the other. But Pinckney is a relatively young guy, and sometimes his brashness of youth comes through. So, with that said, go ahead.
Mr. Pinckney thought an equality of votes in the second branch inadmissible. And this is a small state guy talking too.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, candor obliged him to admit that the large states would feel a partiality for their own citizens and give them a preference in appointments. That they might also find some common points in their commercial interests. There it is. And promote treaties favorable to them. Now, this is insightful because that actually will take place in the future. There is a real distinction. The northern and southern interests, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, and their rice and indigo, had a peculiar interest which might be sacrificed. Once again, tariff of abominations. He's actually predicting the future here. How then shall the larger states be prevented from administering the general government as they please, without being themselves unduly subjected to the will of the smaller? By allowing them some, but not a full proportion. He was extremely anxious that something should be done, considering this as the last appeal to a regular experiment. Congress having failed in almost every effort for an amendment of the federal system. He's talking about the Articles of Confederation. Nothing has prevented a dissolution of it but the appointment of this convention, and he could not express his alarms for the consequences of such an event. He read his motion to form the states into classes with an apportionment of senators among them. It says see Article 4 of his plan, which I don't have in front of me, but basically he's saying bigger states should have 2 seats and smaller states should have 1, or some kind of ranking system. He thinks that's the balancing act that we need, which obviously is not what happened. Any thoughts before I go on?
No, go ahead.
General Pinckney, also of South Carolina, was willing the motion might be considered. He did not entirely approve it. He liked better the motion of Dr. Franklin from June 30th, which we just went over. Some compromise seemed to be necessary, the states being exactly divided on the question for an equality of votes in the second branch. He proposed that a committee consisting of a member from each state should be appointed to devise and report some compromise. Next to speak, of course, is Mr. Luther Martin. He had no objection to a commitment, but no modifications whatever could reconcile the smaller states to the least diminution of their equal sovereignty. He's from Maryland. He's saying we're not going to give up our sovereignty. This is Roger Sherman, not Sharman. You don't get to squeeze them, people. We are now at a full stop, and nobody, he supposed, meant that we should break up without doing something. A committee he thought most likely to hit on some expedient. So this is a giant footnote here. And I guess we'll go through it. Governor Morris thought a committee advisable as the convention had been equally divided. He had a stronger reason also. The mode of appointing a second branch he was sure to defeat the object of it. What is this object? To check the precipitation, changeableness, and excesses of the first branch.
Yeah, stop here for a second. Now, understand, folks, as a reminder, this is the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan going at it. And the reason why it's equally divided, and you had a chart up last week, the number of large states and the number of small states, if you want to consider it that, were pretty close, with the small states outnumbering the large states only by 1 state. And so this is evenly divided. The small states want to have a larger voice. They don't trust the larger states. And when I say larger, I don't necessarily mean geographically, but by population. They don't trust them. They believe that they will then consort with each other and overpower, take over, control the smaller states. The smaller states want to make sure they have a big enough voice to challenge this other faction. And this is really what it's all about. Once again, getting back to a comment I made earlier, this is about making sure that we don't have single faction rule. They understand the danger of single faction rule, be it a monarch or be it any other system, not just because of Britain, but because they've seen it inside their own states. They've seen where a particular faction will take control and dominate politics. They don't want this happening in the Union. And the best way, according to Federalist 10 by Madison, is to set the factions against each other. This is where the debate is. The larger states don't want to set the factions against each other. They want to have the stronger single faction voice. The small states aren't having it. That's what this is all about. And it's fascinating that Roger Sherman had a little bit of say there, because he's the one that ultimately presents the compromise. All right, continue, please.
Okay. Governor Morris continues, every man of observation had seen in the Democratic branches of the state legislatures precipitation, in Congress changeableness, in every department excesses against personal liberty, private property, and personal safety. What qualities are necessary to constitute a check in this case? Abilities and virtue are equally necessary in both branches. Something more than is now wanted. Footnote 6. The checking branch must have a personal interest in checking the other branch. One interest must be opposed to the other interest. Now, this is interesting because that is not the case in our current Congress.
No, thanks to the 17th Amendment.
Yeah, basically now they both, all of our Congress critters represent one of two national parties, and they do not represent their local interests.
It kills Madison's argument from Federalist 10 to set the factions against each other. What has happened is all the factions now drink from the same trough, and we have one big giant faction.
Yeah, and it serves DC and its lobbyists. Vices, as they exist, must be turned against each other. It must have great personal property and must have the aristocratic spirit. It must love to lord it through pride. Pride is indeed the great principle that actuates both the poor and the rich. It is this principle which in the former resists, in the latter abuses authority. It's not the easiest to read.
It's a good point, though. What he's saying, right? What I've already said is the smaller states, they're resisting this because they know that because if there's only a single faction, they're in trouble. They're resisting the Virginia plan. In other words, they want the different factions. They want that Senate to be equal. And of course, the larger states, not so much, because they want to abuse their authority. This is what is being said here. Go ahead.
It, meaning the second branch, should be independent. In religion, the creature is apt to forget its creator.
Ah, boy, I tell you what, is that not prophetic or what? Remember, and I've been saying this in my Constitution classes from the very beginning. The federal government is the child. It is the creation. And I crack up that says creature because one of the ways I like to, and I didn't remember this, but it fits with what I like to say. And so the federal government is the Frankenstein creature. The states created this creature, and the problem is now it's running amok and terrorizing the villagers. We got to get it back inside its cage. And so I'm fascinated. They use the word creature, even though Frankenstein didn't exist yet. But that's exactly right. This is so prophetic. The creature is apt to forget its creator. Absolutely. Go ahead.
That it is otherwise in political affairs, the late debates here are an unhappy proof. The aristocratic body, should be as independent and as firm as the Democratic. Got it. If the members,
now, what he's saying there, see, is what when they look at other systems, typically what you have is in a dual chamber Congress is one voice of the people, one voice of the aristocrats. In Rome, the aristocrats were the Senate. In Britain, it would be the House of Lords. But we don't have aristocrats. But you want something that is a pseudo aristocratic kind of thing because that's what has worked. So they're trying, and so the idea is that the Senate should be closer to being aristocratic. What they mean by that is these are people that are in the system. They are familiar with the system. They have spent time in the system, and they are. And what ultimately happens is chosen by the state legislatures. Why are the state legislatures going to choose particular people? Because they know them. They've been in the system. So it's a pseudo aristocracy is what the Senate winds up being, and this is kind of what's being referred to here.
continuing, if the members of it are to revert to a dependence on the Democratic choice, the Democratic scale will preponderate. All the guards contrived by America have not restrained the senatorial branches of the legislature from a servile complaisance to the Democratic.
Not democracy, pure vote is dangerous. Once again, this is a nod towards the Senate must not only be aristocratic in the sense of people who are in the system, but not democratically voted in. They're appointed from within the system.
If the second branch is to be dependent, we are better without it. To make it independent, it should be for life. It will then do wrong, it will be said. He believed so, he hoped so. The rich will strive to establish their dominion and enslave the rest. They always did. They always will. The proper security against them is to form them into a separate interest. The two full forces will then control each other.
In other words, set the factions against each other.
Let the rich mix with the poor, and in a commercial country, they will establish an oligarchy. Boy, prophetic. Take away commerce, and the democracy will triumph, meaning the rule of the mob. Thus it has been the world over, so it will be among us. Reason tells us we are but men, and we are not to expect any particular interference of heaven in our favor. Basically saying it's human nature.
Mm-hmm.
By thus combining and setting apart the aristocratic interest, the popular interest will be combined against it. There will be a mutual check and mutual security. An independence for life involves the necessary permanency. If he's arguing for permanent appointments to the Senate, I don't know. If we change our measures, nobody will trust us. And how avoid a change of measures but by avoiding a change of men? He is. The opposite of term limits. Ask any man if he confides in Congress, if he confides in the state of Pennsylvania, if he will lend his money or enter into contract. He will tell you no. He sees no stability. He can repose no confidence. If Great Britain were to explain her refusal to treat with us, the same reasoning would be employed. He disliked the exclusion of the second branch from holding offices. It is dangerous. It is like the imprudent exclusion of the military officers during the war from civil appointments. It deprives the executive of the principal source of influence. If danger be apprehended from the executive, what a lift-handed way is this of obviating it?
He doesn't get his wish on that one either, but anyway, continue.
If the son, the brother, or the friend can be appointed, the danger may even be increased, as the disqualified father can then boast of a disinterestedness which he does not possess. Besides, shall the best, most able, the most virtuous citizens not be permitted to hold offices? Who then are to hold them? He was also against paying the senators. They will pay themselves if they can. If they cannot, they will be rich and can do without it. Of such the second branch ought to consist, and none but such can compose it if they are not to be paid. He contended that the executive should appoint and fill the Senate and fill up vacancies. So the president picks the Senate. This gets rid of the difficulty in the present question. You know, this is such a terrible idea, but it's interesting that during the presidency of Adams, you had Hamilton and the Federalist Party, and they did put all their people in all the different positions in government, and it was absolutely terrible. It was the administrative state gone wild very early on. You may begin with any ratio you please. It will come to the same thing. The members being independent and for life may be taken as well from one place as from another. It should be considered, too, how the scheme could be carried through the states. He hoped there was strength in the mind enough in this house to look truth in the face. He did not hesitate to say that loaves and fishes must bribe the demagogues.
I remember what I was saying earlier about we have this misconception that the founding fathers somehow all just agreed with each other. And this is a great example of how much the disagreement sometimes could go. Something that you wouldn't even consider. Why would a founding father even think some of this stuff? Everything was on the table. In a convention like this, every idea is considered, every idea is on the table, and then the debate happens, and then you get rid of the bad stuff. And it's funny because I tell people, they talk about how the partisanship in today's politics has never been so bad. Really? Go to the Constitutional Convention. Go ahead.
Yeah, the other thing we find is we actually have in reality senators for life these days. These octogenarian senators, and they're awful. You know, from Mitch McConnell to Nancy Pelosi.
Now, I don't necessarily agree with term limits in the way that people are proposing it. Term limits exist, and that is them being removed at the vote. But we, don't enforce the term limits as they should. We don't remove these people when it's time to remove them. And B, the states can't because they're no longer appointing them thanks to the 17th Amendment. But I know you mentioned term limits a couple times. The founding fathers didn't consider term limits for a reason. They didn't necessarily want them in there for life, but they understood them to be statesmen that they would leave when the time came. But at the same time, if you've got someone who is beneficial, then you want them in there for a while. When you have a bureaucracy like the Federalist Party did, going into Jefferson's presidency, trying to dictate and control from beneath, then if you're replacing new people right and left and right and left, they've got no experience of dealing with a hardcore bureaucracy that will dictate everything. And so you wind up with an opposite problem with term limits. California is a great example. Term limits ruined, or I shouldn't say ruined, but made worse what's going on in California, because one thing about those who oppose the Constitution, the collectivists, they are a hive mind. So term limits does nothing when it comes to them. There's no change because you can interchange them like puzzle pieces that are cut the same way. And so what it does is it puts at risk the individuality of those who would think otherwise. All right, go ahead, sir.
They must be made to expect higher offices under the general than the state governments. A Senate for life will be a noble bait. Without such captivating prospects, the popular leaders will oppose and defeat the plan. He perceived that the first branch was to be chosen by the people of the states, the second by those chosen by the people. Is not here a government by the states? A government by compact between Virginia in the first and second branch, Massachusetts in the first and second branch, etc.
Stop here for a second. Notice what he said here. Is this not a government by the states? In my classes, I would say, do you want the president involved in your life? No, he's not there for you. He's there for the union. This government is for the union. It is not of the people, by the people, and for the people. No thanks, Mr. Lincoln. It is for the states, by the states, and of the states. And then your local government takes care of you. And that's what he's saying here.
And that's an incredible. That's a really important point. I mean, it underlies almost the entire system of federalism that we're on the verge of losing. But yeah, he's going the right direction on that part of it, at least.
He got something right.
This is going back to mere treaty. If no government at all, sorry, it is no government at all. It is altogether dependent on the states and will act over again the parts which Congress has acted. Remember, the previous Congress was incredibly unsuccessful. It was chaotic. That's why the people were demanding this convention. So when you see them talking about the errors of Congress or the mistakes made of commission and omission, that's what he's referring to.
You need a firm government, but not an overpowering government. The problem is, and I've said this in my class, is with the Articles of Confederation, you had a lamb. What you need is a lion, but the problem is lions eat people. So what do? You create the lion, the firm government, but then you put checks and balances and a cage, basically, so that it is not set against the people, but it needs to be strong enough to be set against the enemies, foreign. So it gets back to, for example, the president. I want a strong president. A strong president has power to do certain things in the foreign affairs world when it comes to war or whatever. There are opportunities for the president to be strong. We want the president to be strong when it comes to those external things, but not domestically. And it's not a matter of if the federal government should be firm or not. It's that it should be firm where it should be and stay out of the business where it shouldn't be.
Speaking of firm governments, a firm government alone can protect our liberties. He fears the influence of the rich. They will have the same effect here as elsewhere if we do not, by such a government, keep them within their proper sphere. We should remember that the people never act from reason alone, I'll say.
I'm sorry. That brings to mind a quote that I like. I know you don't have necessarily a favorable opinion of the person who said it, but I think it's one of the greatest quotes. Winston Churchill, the best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. And that's basically what's being said here. Go ahead.
Well, actually, that's actually the foundation of the entire quasi proposal I've been talking about with expanding electoral college, which we talked about a little bit, but we'll get to that another time. The rich will take advantage of their passions and make these the instruments for oppressing them. It means they will fool the crowd. The result of the contest will be a violent aristocracy or a more violent despotism.
So you have dangerous democracy or violent aristocracy, or you find a way to set them against each other and create a system with checks and balances so that you get the benefits from those things rather than the violence or the dangerous nature.
And what could argue we got both? What we do have now, we have an aristocracy where the ultra rich basically own the politicians and the lobbyists.
And they use democracy to get it.
Yeah, they absolutely did. So basically we're stuck in the middle. We're living through the worst case scenarios on both ends of the spectrum. The schemes of the rich will be favored by the extent of the country. The people in such distant parts cannot communicate and act in concert. They will be the dupes of those who have more knowledge and intercourse. The only security against encroachments will be a select and sagacious body of men instituted to watch against them on all sides. He meant only to hint these observations without grounding any emotion on them. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yes.
All right. Next to speak is going to be Mr. Edmund Randolph from Virginia. He favored the commitment, though he did not expect much benefit from the expedient. He animadverted on the warm and rash language of Mr. Bedford on Saturday. And if you go back to last episode, Bedford had a pretty good spiel.
And the language they use here is, and Madison uses, and just the way they spoke and wrote back then. He animadverted on the warm and rash language. We just don't talk that way anymore.
It's like the fifth time. It's like the fifth time that he's used animadverted, which is really sucks for me because it's a hard word to say.
Go ahead.
Reminded the small states that if the large states should combine some danger of which that he did not deny there would be a check in the revisionary power of the executive, and intimated that in order to render this still more effectual, he would agree that in the choice of the executive, each state should have an equal vote. He was persuaded that two such opposite bodies of as Mr. Morris had planned could never long coexist. Dissensions would arise, as has been seen, even between the Senate and the House of Delegates in Maryland. Appeals would be made to the people, and in a little time, the commoners commotions would be the result. He was far from thinking the large states could subsist of themselves any more than the small, an avulsion which would involve the whole in ruin, and he was determined to pursue such a scheme of government as would secure against such a calamity.
They're being harshly critical of each other, and what ultimately happens is something that's a little bit of both.
Apparently, Maryland's having some issues with gridlock with its bicameral legislature. All right, next to speak is Mr. Strong. That is Caleb Strong from Massachusetts. Big state. He was for the commitment and had hoped the mode of constituting both branches would be referred. If they should be established on different principles, contentions would prevail, and there would never be a concurrence in necessary measures.
In other words, he's disagreeing that they should be different from each other. And the opposite is true. You want that debate. Debate equals liberty. Continue.
It says Dr. Williamson. I don't know who that is supposed to. Is that Hugh Williamson from North Carolina?
Perhaps.
If we do not concede on both sides, our business must soon be at an end. He approved of the commitment, supposing that as the committee would be a smaller body, a compromise would be pursued with more coolness. This commitment is just basically they're arguing over whether to have a committee to discuss what they were discussing. Wilson objected to the committee because it would decide according to that very rule of voting, which was opposed on one side. Experience in Congress had also proved the inutility of committees consisting of members from each state. He's worried about what he's saying is small states are going to gang up and outvote the big states if it's one per state for this committee. Lansing's here already?
He's still there. Yeah, he's still there.
Right.
Lansing and Robert Yates have not taken off just yet.
He would not oppose the commitment, though expecting little advantage from it.
Yeah, Mr. Lansing, John Lansing, and Robert Yates and Alexander Hamilton folks were the three representatives from New York. Lansing and Yates were of an anti-federalist mindset. It wasn't called that yet. It would be. And Hamilton being a nationalist mindset. So poor New York didn't have anybody that was would ultimately be in line with what was really written. They had the two extremes. Imagine sitting at that table.
And eventually the passage of the ratification in New York was only by one vote.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, you got to realize then, as is now, New York City held one point of view. The rest of the state held a different view. But the population was in New York City.
And Tammany Hall would come to exist shortly thereafter, corrupting New York politics from that day forward. By the way, that was Madison's party. Mr. Madison, actually, that's not entirely accurate. The Aaron Burr is actually the one who would start the.
Madison leaned to more Jeffersonian. Aaron Burr was fascinating because he was technically a part of the Jeffersonian Republicans, but he had some nationalistic ideas. And so that's the reason why if the Federalists could not get their guy in 1800, they started trying to push people towards Aaron Burr because at least it wouldn't be Jefferson. So, but anyway, go ahead.
Madison, he opposed the commitment. He had rarely seen any other effect than delay from such committees in Congress. Any scheme of compromise that could be proposed in the committee might as easily be proposed in the House. And a report of the committee, when it contained merely the opinion of the committee, would neither shorten the discussion nor influence the decision of the House.
In other words, what a waste of time to do a committee.
Mr. Gary was for the commitment. Something must be done, or we shall disappoint not only America, but the whole world. He suggested a consideration of the state we should be thrown into by the failure of the Union. We should be without an umpire to decide controversies and must be at the mercy of events. What, too, is to become of our treaties? What of our foreign debts? What of our domestic? We must make concessions on both sides. Without these, the constitutions of the several states would never have been formed.
And the U.S. Constitution does, by the way, address those things ultimately.
Okay, the first question is, shall we commit to a committee? It looks like we get 1 aye, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 ayes. So we are going to have a committee. Now the question is, should it be 1 member per state? We get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 ayes. So it's going to be 1 per state. So the committee gets elected. We're Gary from Massachusetts, Ellsworth from, I guess that's Connecticut. Yates is
New York.
from
New York.
Thank you. Patterson, Franklin from Pennsylvania, Bedford, Martin, George Mason, Mr. Davy, spelled wrong again, Rutledge, and Baldwin. So a few of the big names are not on this committee.
Yeah, a few, and it's an interesting eclectic group. Ellsworth being this Hamiltonian-minded guy. Franklin is somewhere kind of in the middle, but leans Jeffersonian. You got Yates and Mason, who become pretty much the core of the Anti-Federalists. So kind of an eclectic, interesting group there. Now, and as we think about this committee, I recognize committees are sometimes necessary. And understand, folks, that the Constitution and all of the clauses of all the amendments were written in committee. They didn't just, as Madison suggested, just take care of everything in-house. Everything was done by committee. Then it came to the House. Then there was discussion that would go back to committee and back and forth until it was the way they wanted it. That said, when I think about it, a quip by a friend of mine, Dennis Jackson, who is a longtime participant on Constitution Radio, he says something that I absolutely agree with, though, when thinking about all these committees. For God so loved the world, he didn't send a committee. Sometimes you just got to get something done without the long drawn out committee ideas and debates. And I mean, if Congress today was to get its way and micromanage the president regarding war powers, the decision on what to do in the battlefield would occur 6 to 12 months too late because of committees.
The time might be given to the committee and to such as those who to attend the celebrations on the anniversary of independence. The convention adjourned till Thursday. So remember, people, when I said for various reasons, we're going to skip a couple days. Well, here we are. So while everyone else is out celebrating the festivities and shooting off fireworks, that committee
doing a lot of drinking.
That committee of 13 is working these 2 days. So let's see what they come back with on July 5th.
And granted, folks, when we talk about these guys being in the pubs, and I hear people say, well, they were alcoholics. Well, yes and no. You really couldn't drink a whole lot of it because that stuff was so potent that it would kill you if you drank a lot. So while, yes, they did definitely consume their share of alcohol, understand it wasn't like it is today where someone takes drink after drink after drink. That one did the job.
All right, so we get there. And Mr. Gary is going to deliver in from the committee appointed Monday the following report. See what they came up with.
Elbridge, Gary, Massachusetts.
The committee to whom was referred the 8th resolution of the report from the committee of the whole House and so much of the 7th, as has not been decided on, submit the following report. That the subsequent propositions be recommended to the convention on condition that both shall be generally adopted. 1. That in the first branch of the legislature, each of the states now in the Union shall be allowed one member for every 40,000 inhabitants of the description reported in the 7th. Resolution of the Committee of the whole House that each state not containing that number shall be allowed one member, and that all bills for raising or appropriating money and for fixing the salaries of the officers of the government of the United States shall originate in the first branch of the legislature, and shall not be altered or amended by the second branch, and that no money shall be drawn from the public treasury, but in pursuance of appropriations to be originated in the first branch.
Ultimately, that all of that, except for a little bit of it, would become part of the Constitution. They would change it so that the second branch, in other words, the Senate, could alter or amend bills that originated from the House that was regarding revenue, money. But ultimately, I think that there was a fear of, once again, the democratic control of the money, that the states with their people in the Senate should have a check and balance when it came to the monies.
And that's point number 2 from this committee, that in the second branch, each state shall have an equal vote. So that committee did really good work over the last 2 days. And it got a lot closer to what the final product would be.
All of it, except for one thing in that part, is pretty much what happened, ultimately. All of it but one. Well, 2. All of it but 2. The one member per 40,000. I mean, ultimately they would design a method, but then as time passed, we realized we're going to wind up with tens of thousands of bureaucrats, and so a limit on how many a state could have, things like that, was presented. But that's down the road. Go ahead.
Mr. Gorham observed that as the report consisted of propositions mutually conditional, he wished to hear some explanation, touching the grounds on which the conditions were estimated. Mr. Gary says the committee were of different opinions, as well as the deputations from which the committee were taken, and agreed to the report merely in order that some ground of accommodation might be proposed. Those opposed to the equality of votes have only assented conditionally, and if the other side do not generally agree, will not be under any obligation to support the report. So it's not an either or. These 2 resolutions go together. Mr. Wilson says the committee has exceeded their powers. Mr. Martin was for taking the question on the whole report. Instead of voting on these 2 issues differently, they want to bundle it together. That's really what's going on here.
Can you say omnibus? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Mr. Wilson was for a division of the question. Otherwise, it would be a leap in the dark. All right, we're going to get along Madison here. Mr. Madison could not regard the exclusive privilege of originating money bills as any concession on the side of the small states. Experience proved that it had no effect. If 7 states in the upper branch wished a bill to be originated, they might surely find some member from some of the same states in the lower branch who had originated. The restriction as to amendments was of little consequence. Amendments could be handled privately by the Senate to members in the other house. Bills could be negatived, that they might be sent up to the desired shape.
Here, real quick. So remember, I was talking about the Senate having the ability to amend, and he's saying not allowing them to doesn't stop them from doing it. They're gonna do it anyway. It's gonna be more underhanded. Go ahead.
That's exactly right. If the Senate should, which is better than having lobbyists write our bills now. If the Senate should yield to the obstinacy of the first branch, the use of that body as a check would be lost. If the first branch should yield to that of the Senate, the privilege would be nugatory. Experience had also shown both in Great Britain and the States having a smaller regulation that is a source of frequent and obstinate altercations. These considerations had produced a rejection of a like motion on a former occasion when judged by its own merits. It could not therefore be deemed any concession on the present, and left in force all the objections which had prevailed against allowing each state an equal voice. Gosh, he's long-winded. I don't like that. I like Madison less and less every time I have to read one of his run-on sentences.
Yeah, it's funny because I start liking him more. But anyway, go ahead.
He conceived, just be concise. He conceived that the convention was reduced to the alternative of either departing from justice in order to conciliate the smaller states and the minority of the people of the United States, or of displeasing these by justly gratifying the larger states and the majority of the people. He could not himself hesitate as to the option he ought to make.
See, your opinion is based on the fact that you excel on things like X, getting something out in a small number of words, which I don't excel, which is the reason why I like Madison, because, see, I'm a lot like him. I don't want to just write an article. I want to write a book about it. So, yes, I can see why we differ in our opinion on Madison.
Fair enough. The convention, with justice and the majority of the people on their side, had nothing to fear. With injustice and a minority on their side, had everything to fear. It was in vain to purchase concord in the convention on terms which would perpetuate discord among their constituents. The convention ought to pursue a plan which would bear the test of examination, which would be espoused and supported by the enlightened and impartial part of America, and which they could themselves vindicate and urge. The problem is he's not saying anything. It should be considered that although
he's providing a lot of context. Go ahead.
It should be considered that although at first many may judge of the system recommended by their opinion of the convention, yet finally all will judge of the convention by the system. The merits of the system alone can finally and effectually obtain the public suffrage.
What he's saying is we've been doing this in secrecy because we fear how the people are going to view it. We know that they're not going to like what they see if they watch the sausage making. But in the end, if we do this right, it will stand on its merit. The final product will convince people it's a good system if we do this right. Go ahead.
He was not apprehensive that the people of the small states would obstinately refuse to accede to a government founded on just principles and promising them substantial protection. He could not suspect that Delaware would brave the consequences of seeking her fortunes apart from the other states. Rather than submit to such a government, much less could be suspect that she would pursue the rash policy of courting foreign support, which the warmth of one of her representatives, Mr. Bedford, had suggested, or if she should, that any foreign nation would be so rash as to hearken to the overture.
Either you're going to be enjoy the warmth of the Union, or you're going to go looking for help elsewhere, and I don't think you're going to be able to get it.
Yeah, we're not really going to let you become buddies with a foreign power right on our shores, either. And that's the unspoken part of it. Mm-hmm. This is definitely a threat. As little could he suspect that the people of New Jersey, notwithstanding the decided tone of the gentleman from that state, would choose rather to stand on their own legs and bid defiance to events than to acquiesce under an establishment founded on principles, the justice of which they could not dispute, and absolutely necessary to redeem them from the exactions levied on them by the commerce of the neighboring states. They're really talking about the New York-New Jersey trade war right there. They're putting tariffs on each other, and New Jersey was getting their butt kicked. So that's still fresh in everyone's mind. A review of other states, and that's really one of the driving factors for having this convention, was that particular trade war.
Right.
A review of other states would prove that there was as little reason to apprehend an inflexible opposition elsewhere. Harmony in the convention was no doubt much to be desired. satisfaction to all the states, in the first instance, still more so.
Oh, wait a second. Harmony in the convention was no doubt much to be desired. Was that his way of saying, can't we just all get along? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But if the principal states comprehending majority of the people of the U.S. should concur in a just and judicious plan, he had the firmest hopes that all the other states would by degrees accede to it. Mr. Butler said he could not let down his idea of the people of America so far as to believe they would, from mere respect to the convention, adopt a plan evidently unjust. He did not consider the privilege concerning money bills as of any consequence. He urged that the second branch ought to represent the states according to their property. Back to that again.
Mm-hmm. We want the people who owns the most property to have the voice. Once again, we're trying to make sure that no faction takes control, Mr. Butler.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Again, we talked about this before, but we actually did that here in New Hampshire, where the old state legislature, the original Constitution, the state legislature was a portion that was based on tax revenue. So the wealthier counties like Rockingham, where I'm sitting, got more representation than the more rural ones. So that experiment has taken place,
and it failed.
It was balanced enough that it didn't fail miserably, but it failed.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Governor Morris thought the form as well as the matter of the report objectionable. It seemed that in the first place to render amendments impractical.
Now, real quick, Governor Morris, folks, this is a well-respected member of this delegation. He's the one that ultimately leads the committee that writes the preamble. And he essentially wrote the preamble himself. Do not confuse him with Robert Morris. And Robert Morris is somebody else, but they're not related. But Governor Morris, and he's fascinating because most of the time it's hard to gauge him, Hamiltonian or Jeffersonian. He's kind of plays both sides a little bit, but the brilliance of the preamble, that's the man it came from. All right, go ahead.
In the next place, it seemed to involve a pledge to agree to the second part if the first should be agreed to. He conceived the whole aspect of it to be wrong. He came here as a representative of America. He flattered himself. He came here in some degree as a representative of the whole human race. For the whole human race will be affected by the proceedings of this convention. It's interesting. He wished gentlemen to extend their views beyond the present moment of the time, beyond the narrow limits of place from which they derive their political origin. If he were to believe some things which he had heard, he should suppose that we were assembled to truck and bargain for our particular states. He cannot descend to think that any gentlemen are really actuated by those views. So he does not believe in local representation and you should be supporting the people who sent you. He thinks we're there to serve humanity. It's a little problematic, Doug.
A little bit.
We must look forward to the effects of what we do. These alone ought to guide us. Much has been said of the sentiments of the people. They were unknown. They could not be known. All that we can infer is that if the plan we recommend be reasonable and right, all who have reasonable minds and sound intentions will embrace it, notwithstanding what had been said by some gentlemen. Let us suppose that the larger states shall agree and that the smaller refuse, and let us trace the consequences.
So Governor Morris is a fascinating interest. Remember, I told you, he kind of sometimes it was hard to gauge. One thing, though, that he was strong on is he didn't trust the smaller states. He didn't trust the idea of the states. He believed that there should be a stronger union. Again, he's like, hey, I represent the people as a whole. So he was more of a collectivistic mind. But at the same time, he trusted pure democracy, and he feared that as well. So he was right and wrong at the same time. Of course, to achieve one, you needed the other, and that's a fascinating thing about him also. But anyway, So he did, once the Constitution was in place, he did tend to lean in Hamilton's direction more so. Once again, fascinating individual. Go ahead.
He says the opponents of the system in the smaller states will no doubt make a party and noise for a time, but the ties of interest, of kindred and common habits which connect them with the other states will be too strong to be easily broken. In New Jersey particularly, he was sure a great many would follow the sentiments of Pennsylvania and New York, their bigger neighbors. This country must be united. If persuasion does not unite it, the sword will. That turned out to be very prophetic.
Mm-hmm.
He begged that this consideration might have its due weight. The scenes of horror attending civil commotion cannot be described, and the conclusion of them will be worse than the term of their continuance. The stronger party will then make traitors of the weaker, and the gallows and halter will finish the work of the sword.
Now here, while he was sitting there arguing for a strong federal government, he's also warning that the stronger faction will destroy everybody else. So once again, he's sometimes hard to gauge. Go ahead.
How far foreign powers would be ready to take part in the confusions he would not say. Foreign interference. Threats that they will be invited have, it seems, been thrown out.
He's basically saying that if the states have too much autonomy, then they are going to be bickering with each other, and foreign powers will take advantage of that, is basically what he's saying.
And it just so happens that a lot of these New England states are bordering on English Canada.
Yeah. Well, he's from Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania at this point was already kind of leading the abolition of slavery movement. They were the first ones to technically have a law to start moving away from slavery. He was a staunch abolitionist, and this also is a part of what is forming his reasoning. All right, go ahead.
He drew the melancholy picture of foreign intrusions as exhibited in the history of Germany and urged it as a standing lesson to other nations. He trusted that the gentlemen who may have hazarded such expressions did not entertain them until they reached their own lips. But returning to the report, he could not think it in any respect calculated for the public good. As the second branch is now constituted, there will be constant disputes and appeals to the states, which will undermine the general government and control and annihilate the first branch. Suppose that the delegates from Massachusetts and Rhode Island in the upper house disagree, and that the former are outvoted. What results? They will immediately declare that their state will not abide by the decision. And make such representations as will produce that effect.
Again, he's stating the problem of the states bickering, and that it could be detrimental to a firm government.
He's also hinting at nullification.
Mm-hmm.
The same may happen as to Virginia and other states. Of what avail then will be what is on paper.
And he's basically arguing against nullification. He's mentioned it, but he's arguing against it.
State attachments and state importance have been the bane of this country. We cannot annihilate, but we may perhaps take out the teeth of the serpents.
In other words, allow the states to exist, but don't let them dictate to this new system. Well, then you might as well not have the state sovereignty in the first place.
Exactly. This is a nationalist argument. He wished her ideas to be enlarged to the true interest of man, instead of being circumscribed within the narrow compass of a particular spot. And after all, how little can be the motive yielded by the selfishness for such a policy? Who can say whether he himself, much less whether his children, would the next year be an inhabitant of this or that state? Well, if you move to another state, then you start representing that state. How we doing on time?
It is top of the hour.
I think we can do Bedford here. Bedford speaks. He says he found that what he had said as to the small states being taken by the hand had been misunderstood, and he rose to it.
Now, I want to open this up real quick. So we have our good friend from Pennsylvania who's arguing that the states could be dangerous. Now we have Mr. Bedford coming in. He's from Delaware. He's all about states' rights. I'm here to say that he's probably starting what he's saying, kind of pissed at what was just said. All right, go ahead.
Let me explain myself. He did not mean that the small states would court the aid and interposition of foreign powers. He meant that they would not consider the federal compact as dissolved until it should be so by the acts of the large states. In this case, the consequences of the breach of faith on their part and the readiness of the small states to fulfill their engagements would be that foreign nations having demands on this country would find it in their interest to take the small states by the hand in order to do themselves justice. So basically, no, we're not saying we're going to run away from the Union, at least not until the big states start to bully us. This was what he meant. But no man can foresee to what extremities the small states may be driven by oppression. He observed also in apology that some allowance ought to be made for the habits of his profession, in which warmth was natural and sometimes necessary. But there is not an apology in what was said by Mr. Governor Morris, that the sword is to unite, by Mr. Gorham, that Delaware must be annexed to Pennsylvania, and New Jersey divided between Pennsylvania and New York.
Hang on a sec. So here's a key. Bedford not only is a staunch supporter of states' rights and regions and localism. Remember, Delaware, the whole time as a colony, was considered the southern counties of Pennsylvania. They fought to be something separate. When the before the Declaration of Independence, they were like, we're the first state, man. We are not a part of Pennsylvania. We want our sovereignty. So he's speaking from a little bit of a personal experience too.
He says, to hear such language without emotion would be to renounce the feelings of a man and the duty of a citizen. As to the propositions of the committee, the lesser states have thought it necessary to have a security somewhere. This has been thought necessary for the executive magistrate of the proposed government, who has a sort of negative on the laws. And is it not of more importance that the states should be protected than that the executive branch of government should be protected? Hear, hear, Mr. Bedford. In order to obtain this, the smaller states have conceded as to the constitution of the first branch and as to money bills. If they be not granted by correspondent concessions to the second branch, is it to be supposed that they will ever accede to the plan? And what will be the consequences if nothing should be done? The condition of the United States requires that something should be immediately done. It will be better that a defective plan should be adopted than that none should be recommended. He saw no reason why defects might not be supplied by meetings 10, 15, or 20 years hence. And that is what basically would lead to Article 5. We should have conventions. And Doug's heard me argue they should have mandated an Article 5 convention every 10 years. We'd be a much different country if that were the case. That's a pretty good place to end it on, I think, today.
Okay. You got Morris and Bedford, tit for tat. Ellsworth is going to probably kind of side with Morris a little bit. We'll see what happens next. Boy, it's almost as good as a drama that you could watch on TV, huh?
Yeah, someone really ought to make this. Well, I guess they have done a few different attempts at doing this as a documentary, but they give up too much poetic license, I think, the ones that I've seen.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed Bedford's arguments there. He said, look, we have to get look, whatever we do isn't going to be perfect, but we have to have a plan, because if we have no plan, it's anarchy. And we've already seen, big states threatening the small states, and we don't want to have that, because then foreign powers are going to get involved.
Right.
So let's put together a plan, dang it. And if we have to adjust it down the road, we can do that.
Right.
That's really what he's saying. The unity is most important.
It's better to have something. So let's get it done.
Yeah, and you can tell that they've been at this thing for a month now, and people are it's like, okay, we need to move the ball. Let's get this going a little quicker. Yeah.
Well, and understand, that they had been bickering and hadn't really gotten anything done except for maybe the structure until they began to pray. Remember, just not too long ago, where Benjamin Franklin recommended that they pray. And what they began to do, not all of them, but a number of them, is they began to pray before each session. But because there was no clergy brought in, they would all meet at the church down the street. They would have their prayer, and then they would go to the session, the ones that did. And we did begin to see movement, but not as much as they would like. And this is where what you're saying is there's a little bit more movement than there was the first 4 or 5 weeks, but we're not quite getting the movement yet. And this is where then they say, well, if we want movement, then let's just admit it. We're writing a new constitution. And that, my friends, is coming up soon. And that's going to send a lot of people out the door.
All right. Pretty fun day again. Doug, where can everybody find you?
DouglasVGibbs.com. DouglasVGibbs.com. I'm pretty much writing every day. And lately, because the news has been rehashed, what we're seeing so much, I've gone into a little bit of history recently. So some of my articles, a lot of them recently, I get into a little bit of history. I get into why our system is the way it is. And part of the reason I do that is because I'm trying to make everybody understand why the system is placed and why what people like the DSA is recommending is not only bad, but it's failed already. Not just in the 20th century, Articles Confederation and further back. So visit the site, DouglasVGibbs.com. A handful of the articles go into deeper territory, or they're excerpts from my books. So in those cases, you need to either get the book or become a patron in order to read them. But most of the articles, almost all of them, are available to everyone. DouglasVGibbs.com.
Very good. Until next week, everybody. Thanks for watching. Cheers.